"Leave me here. Just save my child," she begged. The Spokane said, "I won't let both of you die here." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. In the heart of a vast, unforgiving wilderness, a woman and her child were trapped in a nightmare. The air was thick with dust as the winds howled relentlessly across the empty plains. The sun blazed high above, casting a harsh light over the barren landscape. For miles, nothing but dry earth and sparse patches of scraggly grass stretched out in every direction. The woman, her face pale with exhaustion, stumbled along the dirt path, her child clutched tightly to her chest. Her feet were raw and bleeding, but she kept moving, driven by the desperate need to save her child. She had no choice. The outlaws had caught up to them again. Her heart pounded in her chest as she heard the sound of hooves behind her, growing louder with each passing second. She dared not look back. She had been running for hours, with nothing but the shirt on her back and her child's life depending on her every step. The child, no older than 5, was weak from dehydration and hunger, her tiny body trembling with each labored breath. The woman's thoughts raced. She couldn't keep running forever, but she had to buy enough time. She needed a miracle. As the outlaws closed in, the woman made a decision. She stopped in her tracks and turned to face the oncoming riders. She had no weapon, no way to defend herself. Her only hope was to protect her child. "Leave me here," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Just save my child." Her words hung in the air, desperate and pleading, as the outlaws pulled closer. But just as hope seemed to fade, a rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the setting sun. A lone figure, riding fast and with purpose. The woman's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? The rider was tall, a man of strong build, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. As he rode closer, she saw the unmistakable markings of a warrior. He was from the Spokane tribe. The outlaws, unaware of the danger they were about to face, continued to advance. The woman held her breath, praying for the warrior to reach them in time. As the rider neared, he slowed his horse and brought it to a stop beside the woman. His eyes locked with hers, filled with a calm determination. Without a word, he dismounted swiftly, and in one fluid motion, he reached for the child, lifting her into his arms. The woman's eyes widened in disbelief. You'll save her?" she whispered, her voice shaky with a mixture of fear and hope. The Spokane warrior nodded once, his gaze unwavering. "I won't let both of you die here," he said, his voice steady. With that, he mounted his horse again, holding the child securely in front of him. He looked back at the woman, his eyes softening for just a moment. "Stay here. I will return for you." Then, without another word, he spurred his horse forward, racing into the distance. The woman stood frozen, watching as the warrior disappeared into the horizon, her heart filled with a strange mix of relief and terror. Was this truly the salvation she had prayed for? Or was it another cruel trick of fate? She didn't know. All she could do was wait, and pray that the warrior's promise would not be broken. The woman stood frozen, her body trembling from exhaustion, the weight of her situation pressing heavily on her chest. She had watched the Spokane warrior ride away with her child, her heart racing with both relief and dread. The moment had come so suddenly, so unexpectedly, that she wasn't sure if it was real or just a fleeting dream. She could only wait. The sun, now low on the horizon, cast long shadows over the barren land. The cold was beginning to set in, and the wind that had once been blistering with heat now felt like an icy blade against her skin. She pulled her ragged shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to keep the chill at bay, but the emptiness inside her was far worse than the cold. Every minute felt like an eternity. She had not seen the warrior return for what seemed like hours. The cries of the child were still fresh in her ears, her desperate plea echoing in her mind. She had done what she thought was best, given the only choice she could make to save her child. But what if it had been a mistake? What if the warrior had been lying, or worse? What if the outlaws were already upon him? Her mind raced with the possibilities. She stood up, her knees buckling slightly as she did, the physical strain finally catching up with her. But she couldn't sit still any longer. She had to do something. She looked toward the direction the Spokane warrior had gone, but the land was vast and empty, no sign of him in sight. She began walking toward the horizon, the weight of her body and the fear for her child making every step feel like a struggle. With each step, she tried to push the panic from her mind, focusing instead on the promise the warrior had made. "I won't let both of you die here." She repeated his words in her mind, over and over again. Her eyes scanned the barren land, the dust swirling at her feet as she moved. The world around her seemed eerily silent, as if holding its breath. The quiet was broken only by the sound of her footsteps, each one a reminder of how alone she felt. Just as the last sliver of sunlight dipped below the horizon, she saw movement in the distance. Her heart leapt in her chest. Was it him? Was it the warrior returning with her child? She quickened her pace, her legs protesting with every step. The figure grew larger, and she could make out the outline of a rider on horseback. But as the figure drew closer, her heart sank. It was not the Spokane warrior. It was another man, rough-looking, with a weathered face and a bandana tied around his neck. His eyes flickered toward her, cold and calculating. The woman froze, instinctively reaching for the knife she kept tucked in her belt, but then she stopped herself. There was no point in running now. She was too tired, too weak, and whatever this man wanted, she couldn't fight it off. The man stopped his horse a few feet from her, his eyes scanning her face for a moment before he spoke. "You're alone," he said, his voice gravelly. "Where's the child?" The woman didn't answer immediately. She was too scared, too unsure of how to respond. She had to protect her child, no matter the cost. "I told you," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told you to save my child." The man's lips curled into a smirk. "Save her," he repeated, mocking her words. "The child's long gone. And now you're mine." He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the dirt. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be." The woman's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to back away, but the man was too close. He reached for her, but before he could grab her, there was a sharp, powerful sound, the unmistakable thud of hooves. The man looked up, his expression changing instantly from smug confidence to something darker. The woman didn't wait to see what happened next. She bolted toward the sound of the approaching horse, praying, hoping that it was the Spokane warrior. She could hear the pounding of hooves, getting closer and closer, and then, just as she turned a corner of the ridge, she saw him. The warrior was there, riding fast, his face set with a fierce determination. He saw her and the man in an instant, his eyes flashing with recognition and anger. Without hesitation, he pulled his bow from his back, notching an arrow in a single fluid motion. "Get away from her," he growled, his voice like thunder. The man's hand dropped to his gun, but he was too slow. The arrow flew through the air with deadly accuracy, striking the man's weapon and sending it flying from his hand. The man staggered back, stunned, but the warrior was already on him, pulling him to the ground with a single motion. The woman watched, her breath catching in her throat as the warrior disarmed the man and held him firmly against the ground. "Stay down," the warrior ordered, his voice unwavering. The man didn't argue. The warrior looked up at the woman, his eyes softening just for a moment. "You're safe now," he said, his voice steady but full of the unspoken promise of protection. The woman's knees buckled, and she collapsed to the ground in relief. She had been saved. Her child was safe. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. The woman sat against a large rock, her body finally giving in to exhaustion after the terrifying encounter with the outlaw. Her hands shook as she clutched the fabric of her worn dress, the only thing keeping her from completely falling apart. The Spokane warrior had done what he promised. He had saved her. And yet, as she looked out over the vast, endless expanse of land, she knew that their troubles were far from over. Her child, still cradled in the warrior's arms, was safe for now, but what would happen next? Would the warrior keep his word and return her to her home, or was she bound to this unknown life in the wilderness? She had no answers. The world felt both empty and full at once, and she struggled to find a place for herself in this new reality. She had no family, no friends, nothing but the strength of this stranger who had sworn to protect her. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions and doubts. The wind blew cold against her face, the stillness of the evening only adding to her unease. The warrior had given her his word, but what did that mean? What kind of life could she have now? Slowly, she pulled herself to her feet, using the rock for support. She needed to know. She had to understand what her future would look like before she could ever feel at peace. The Spokane warrior was standing a few paces away, watching the horizon as the last light of day faded. His posture was relaxed, but there was a quiet strength about him that seemed to fill the air around him. He was a protector, that much was clear, but what did he expect from her? Was she to stay here, living among strangers? Or was there another path he had in mind? She gathered her courage and approached him, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "What now?" she asked, her eyes searching his for answers. The warrior turned to face her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence between them felt thick, as if he was considering his words carefully. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady. "You stay with us," he said simply. "The Spokane tribe will take you in. You and your child will be safe here." The woman's heart skipped a beat. "But she hesitated, unsure of how to continue. "I can't stay here. I don't belong among your people." The warrior's eyes softened, and for the first time, a flicker of something like understanding passed through them. "You belong now," he said, his voice firm. "The tribe is not just blood. It is heart, loyalty, and strength. You proved that today. You proved you would do anything to protect your child." The woman felt her breath catch in her throat. The idea of living with these strangers, of relying on them for her safety, was terrifying. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the sense of security that came from the warrior's words. She had nothing left in the world except her child and the promise he had made to keep them safe. "What if I don't want to stay?" she asked quietly, almost afraid to hear the answer. The warrior took a step closer, his presence overwhelming yet comforting. "Then you leave. But know this, the outlaws won't stop hunting you, and the land outside our borders is dangerous. If you stay, you'll have a family here. If you leave, you'll be alone." The weight of his words settled heavily in her chest. She had always been independent, always believed that she could survive on her own. But now, with her child's life in the balance, she knew that surviving alone wasn't enough. She needed protection, and more importantly, she needed to protect her child. The warrior seemed to sense her inner turmoil. He gave her a slight nod. "Take your time to decide," he said, turning back toward the campfire where the rest of the tribe had begun to gather. "The decision is yours." The woman watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the twilight. She sat down again, feeling the weight of his words settle deep within her. The world was so much larger than she had ever known. And in this moment, she felt both small and impossibly large at the same time. She could choose her fate now, but the path ahead was uncertain. She glanced down at her child, still asleep in her arms. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from the child's face. "Should we stay?" The child didn't answer, but the peace in her face gave the woman a sense of clarity she hadn't felt before. The child had survived the worst of it, and so had she. Together, they would face whatever came next. With a deep breath, the woman stood up, ready to face the decision that lay ahead. The warrior's words echoed in her mind, and she knew that, no matter the path she chose, it was time to stop running. It was time to stop being afraid. The next morning, the woman woke to the soft chirping of birds and the distant murmur of the Spokane tribe preparing for the day. The fire from the night before had burned low, leaving behind only a smoldering pile of ash. The warrior, whom she had come to trust more than she ever thought possible, was already up and speaking with a few of the other tribe members. His voice was steady, commanding respect without ever needing to raise it. She watched him for a moment, the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her mind. The decision was hers now, but she felt the uncertainty creeping in. She had thought the choice would be clear once she heard his offer, but the reality of it, the weight of what it meant to leave behind everything she knew, was far more complicated. She had to decide, stay here, among the Spokane, with the promise of protection, a family she could trust, or leave, to try to find her own way again, to risk everything for the possibility of freedom. But freedom from what? She couldn't answer that question. She only knew that, in that moment, the warrior had been her savior. He had kept his word. He had saved her child. It wasn't just his actions that made her trust him, it was his quiet strength. It was the way he stood, always alert, yet never threatening, always present, yet never overbearing. She stood up slowly, cradling her child in her arms, and made her way to where the warrior stood. As she approached, he turned to her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She wasn't sure what to say. What did one say to a person who had given them everything when they had nothing to offer in return? The warrior broke the silence first. Have you decided? His voice was calm, but there was a sharpness to it that hinted at his anticipation. I have, she replied, her voice steady. I want to stay. I want my child to grow up safe. The warrior nodded, his face showing the smallest hint of approval. You have made the right choice. It wasn't just the words that reassured her, it was the way he said them, as if he truly believed it. There was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt. He knew what was at stake, and he was willing to stand by her. The woman looked down at her child, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and fear. She had made the right choice. She was certain of it, but the reality of the decision felt like a heavy stone resting on her chest. She was leaving behind everything she had ever known, and even though the Spokane were offering her safety, there was still so much about them that was foreign, so much she didn't understand. Would she ever truly belong here? Could she ever trust them as her own people? As if reading her thoughts, the warrior spoke again. You are not an outsider here. Not anymore. His words cut through her uncertainty like a sharp blade. You will learn our ways, and we will protect you. You will find your place with us. She nodded, grateful for his reassurance. Thank you, she whispered, feeling a lump form in her throat. Thank you for saving us. He smiled slightly, a rare and fleeting expression. You saved yourself. We just helped you along the way. She wasn't sure if his words were meant to comfort her or to remind her of her own strength, but either way, they gave her a sense of peace. For the first time since she had arrived in this strange new world, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she could make a life here. She glanced around at the small camp, the Spokane tribe moving with quiet efficiency, preparing for the day ahead. They were a people who had learned to survive in this harsh land, a land that seemed to demand strength from all who called it home. She wondered, for the first time, if she could learn to be strong too. The warrior looked at her one last time, his gaze filled with something unspoken. He was ready to move on, but there was still a part of him that lingered, as if waiting for her to make the first real step forward. Follow me, he said softly, turning toward the heart of the camp. I will show you where you will stay, and where your new life begins. She followed him without a word, her heart pounding in her chest, but this time it was not from fear. It was from something else, a hope, fragile but growing, that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she could belong. The warrior led her to a small shelter, a simple tent made of hide, nestled at the edge of the camp. It wasn't much, but it was warm and safe. She stood at the entrance, her child still cradled in her arms, staring at the shelter. This was where she would live now. This would be home. The warrior stepped back, giving her space to enter. This is yours, he said simply. The woman swallowed hard, her emotions rising in her chest. She nodded again, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you. The warrior gave her one last glance before walking away, disappearing into the camp. She stood there for a moment, staring at the small shelter before her, the weight of everything finally sinking in. But as she stepped inside, she felt a flicker of something, hope, or perhaps peace, that she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe, for the first time in years, she could finally stop running. The woman stood in the doorway of the small shelter, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. Inside, the space was simple, a small fire pit in the center, a few blankets rolled neatly in the corner, and a small bundle of herbs hanging from the low beams above. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had had in a long time. The shelter smelled of earth and wood smoke, a comforting scent that made the woman feel, for the first time since her arrival, that she might be able to call this place home. She stepped inside, setting her child down gently on one of the blankets. The child, still weak from the long journey, stirred but did not wake. The woman knelt beside her, brushing a lock of hair from her face. She had promised herself that she would protect her child, no matter the cost, but now, in the quiet of this new life, she felt the weight of that promise. The world outside the shelter was still harsh, unforgiving, but for now, she was safe. She could hear the distant sounds of the tribe moving around the camp, voices calling to one another, the soft thud of footsteps in the dirt, the occasional laughter. The warrior had returned to the heart of the camp, but she knew he would not be far. The protection he had offered was not just a promise, it was a reality. But what would her role be here? She had come to the tribe as a stranger, an outsider, but now she had been accepted. Would she learn their ways? Would she ever feel truly like one of them? The thought weighed heavily on her mind. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she could not hide from it any longer. She would have to learn, to adapt, to grow stronger for the sake of her child. And so, as the fire burned low in the pit, the woman sat in silence, contemplating what lay ahead. The warrior's words echoed in her mind. "You will find your place with us." She had heard them as reassurance, but now, she wondered if it had been a promise she could truly fulfill. It wasn't just about survival, it was about belonging. As night fell, the tribe gathered around their own fires, speaking in soft murmurs, sharing stories, and preparing for the next day. The woman stood, lifting her child in her arms once more, and walked toward the center of the camp, where the warrior stood watching the fire with the other tribe members. His face, usually so unreadable, softened when he saw her approach. He had been keeping an eye on her, she could tell, but he never interfered. He gave her space, trusting her to find her way in her own time. "You've settled in?" he asked, his voice deep and steady. The woman nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I think so," she replied, her voice tentative but steady. "It's not what I'm used to, but it feels right." The warrior gave a small nod, as though he understood exactly what she meant. "This is where you belong now," he said quietly, the words simple but full of meaning. "You'll learn our ways, and in time, you'll find your place." The woman looked around at the camp, at the people who now surrounded her. She had thought of them as strangers, as people she could never understand, but now, with the warrior's words echoing in her mind, she saw them differently. They were not just a tribe, they were a family, bound together by something deeper than blood. She didn't know if she could ever fully belong, but she knew she was not alone anymore. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but the warrior heard it all the same. He nodded again, his eyes softening. "It is what we do," he replied simply. "We protect those who need it, and we protect each other." The woman felt a lump form in her throat as she realized the truth of his words. She had been saved, not just by the warrior, but by the entire tribe. They had accepted her, despite her being an outsider, despite her being someone who had no place in their world. "I'll do my part," she said, the resolve settling in her chest. "I'll learn. I'll help. I won't be a burden." The warrior's eyes flickered with something like approval. "Good. Your strength will be a welcome addition." And just like that, the woman felt a shift in herself. She had spent so long running from her past, from the life she had known, but now, for the first time, she felt the possibility of a future. It wasn't the life she had imagined, but it was a life. One that held promise, one that held hope. She walked back to the shelter with her child in her arms, feeling the weight of the journey behind her, but also the quiet strength of the future ahead. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a place here, and she was determined to find it. The woman had spent the following days adjusting to her new life within the Spokane tribe, but each day still brought its own set of challenges. The camp had become more familiar, and the faces that once seemed foreign were starting to feel like those of people who shared a bond with her. The warrior, who had saved her and her child, continued to offer his guidance, though his presence was always distant, a reminder that he was a protector, not an intimate part of her life. Yet, there was a warmth in his silence, a kind of understanding that made her feel safer. She had learned the basics of their way of life, how they hunted, gathered, and lived off the land. She had even begun to make small contributions, helping with the cooking and cleaning around the camp. But it wasn't until one afternoon that she felt the true weight of what it meant to belong. The woman had taken her child with her to the riverbank, a place she had found to be peaceful and quiet, where the sound of the water flowing over rocks seemed to clear her mind. As she sat there, watching the child play in the shallows, her mind wandered to her past, the life she had left behind. It felt so distant now, like a dream she had once lived. But there were still moments when the pain of that life resurfaced, and she would find herself lost in thought, wondering if she had made the right decision. Had she truly chosen the best path for her child? Would she be able to raise her here, in this wild place, among people she had only just started to understand? These questions swirled in her mind, and she stood, walking along the river's edge, searching for an answer that didn't seem to come. As she reached the bend in the river, where the water deepened and flowed faster, she noticed the warrior standing on the opposite bank, watching her silently. His presence wasn't startling. She had grown accustomed to him appearing when she least expected it. He seemed to be a part of the land itself, like one of the trees or the mountains, silent, steady, and ever-present. "You've been quiet," he said when he saw her approach. "I was thinking," she replied softly, her voice barely above the rush of the river. "About the past. And the future." The warrior nodded, stepping closer to her. "The past is gone," he said, his voice calm and firm. "The future is all that matters now." She looked at him, his words grounding her in the moment. It was true. She could not go back to the life she had known. And though the future seemed uncertain, it was something she could shape with her own hands. "But the future," she began, her voice faltering slightly, "it's so unknown. I don't know if I'm ready for it." The warrior's eyes softened, and for the first time, he spoke in a way that was not just about survival, but about connection. "No one is ever truly ready," he said. "We don't prepare for the future. We make it." The simplicity of his words struck her, and she felt something shift within her. She had been living in the shadow of fear for so long, afraid of what would happen next, afraid of being left alone again. But here, in this moment, with this tribe that had taken her in, she realized that her survival wasn't just about finding safety. It was about finding peace within herself. "I've been afraid," she confessed, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Afraid of failing. Afraid of losing everything again." The warrior stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "You've already lost enough," he said. "But now, you have the chance to build something new. Something stronger." His words resonated deeply with her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of her fears begin to lift. Maybe the future wasn't something to fear after all. Maybe it was something she could embrace. The warrior turned away from the river and began to walk back toward the camp, but he paused and looked back at her. "The tribe will need you. Your child will need you. The strength you carry within you will be your guide." She watched him for a moment, his figure moving back into the camp, blending with the shadows of the trees. And as she stood by the river, the weight of her past fading behind her, she realized something. This wasn't just a new beginning for her child. It was a new beginning for her, too. A beginning where fear no longer held her back. A beginning where she could make her own future, step by step, day by day. And in that moment, for the first time since she had arrived, she truly felt like she had a place here. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. The days that followed were filled with small, but significant moments that allowed the woman to integrate further into the Spokane tribe. She spent her time learning more about their way of life, the rhythms of the seasons, the language of the land, and the strength of their community. The warrior, as always, remained a steady presence, guiding her when needed but never pushing her too hard. She had taken his words to heart. She was part of this tribe now, and it was time for her to embrace that reality. But even as she adapted, there were moments when she felt the weight of her past creeping back in. One afternoon, as she worked alongside the other women, gathering herbs near the forest's edge, she found herself lost in thought. The sun was warm on her skin, and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees was soothing, but her mind wandered. She thought about the life she had left behind, her home, the town where she had been shunned, and the desperate journey that had brought her here. She had known fear before, but the fear she had felt in the wilderness, separated from her child, had been unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was that fear, that raw, crippling terror, that made her wonder if she was truly ready for this new life. Could she really find peace here? Could she trust the Spokane as her own people? It was in the quiet of those moments, as she walked among the trees, that she realized how much she had changed since her arrival. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was growing, adapting, finding strength within herself that she hadn't known existed. As she returned to camp, her thoughts were interrupted by a call from the warrior. He stood by the edge of the camp, watching her approach with an intensity that made her heart skip. "You have learned much," he said as she drew near, his voice calm and steady. "But there is more for you to see." She nodded, a sense of curiosity rising within her. "What do you mean?" "There is a ceremony," the warrior replied, his eyes meeting hers. "It is time for you to be fully accepted into the tribe." The woman's heart quickened. She had known there was something more to being part of the Spokane, but she hadn't expected it to come so soon. The warrior extended his hand, a silent invitation for her to follow him. She did so without hesitation, her curiosity piqued by his words. He led her to a small clearing at the edge of the camp, where the fire was already burning brightly. Several of the tribe members were gathered around, their faces solemn but welcoming. The woman's gaze swept over the scene, and for the first time, she realized that this ceremony was not just about her. It was about the tribe as a whole, and the bond that tied them all together. The warrior turned to her, his expression unreadable but steady. "This is the moment where you will be accepted, where you will become one of us," he said. "You have proven yourself worthy. Now, it is time to show your commitment." The woman felt a rush of emotions. She had feared this moment, not knowing if she could ever truly belong. But now, as the flames flickered before her and the eyes of the tribe were upon her, she understood. This was her chance to prove that she had found her place. The ceremony began, with the tribe's elder stepping forward, his face lined with wisdom and age. He spoke in a language the woman had begun to understand, his words carrying the weight of tradition and history. The warrior stood beside her, his presence a silent strength. As the elder spoke, the woman felt the bond of the tribe tighten around her. She was no longer an outsider. She had been accepted, not because of her past, but because of her present, because of the woman she had become in the face of adversity. The elder finished his speech and turned to her, his eyes kind but firm. "You are now one of us," he said, his voice resonating through the air. "You are a daughter of the Spokane. Your strength is our strength. Your survival is our survival." The woman nodded, her heart full of gratitude. She had found her place, and it was here, among the Spokane. As the ceremony ended, the tribe gathered around her, offering their respect, their support, and their acceptance. She was no longer a stranger. She was a part of something greater than herself. The warrior, who had watched the entire ceremony with quiet pride, approached her as the others dispersed. He looked into her eyes, his expression softer than usual. "You have done well," he said, his voice low. "This is your home now." The woman smiled, the weight in her chest lifting. She had come to this place as a broken woman, a woman who had been running from her past, from her fear. But now, as she stood among the Spokane, she realized she was no longer running. She had found something worth staying for, something worth fighting for. And as the sun set over the camp, casting long shadows across the earth, she knew that her journey was just beginning. The woman's new life among the Spokane had begun to feel more natural with each passing day, but there were still moments when doubt crept into her thoughts. Despite her growing sense of belonging, she often found herself reflecting on the life she had left behind. The warrior's words about embracing the future rang in her mind, but the past was a shadow that she couldn't easily escape. Each day, she worked alongside the other members of the tribe, learning their customs and traditions, growing stronger and more self-assured. But the real test was yet to come. One afternoon, as she was gathering firewood near the outskirts of the camp, she noticed something unusual. A lone rider approached the camp from the north, moving slowly, cautiously. The woman's instincts kicked in. She could sense something was wrong. The horse was exhausted, its rider tense, eyes darting around as though on alert. She hurried back to the camp, her heart racing. As she entered the center of the camp, she saw the warrior already speaking with the rider, his expression serious. She could hear snippets of their conversation, but it wasn't until the rider dismounted that she understood the gravity of the situation. The warrior turned to her, his eyes hardening as he walked over. "There are scouts from a neighboring tribe," he said quietly, his voice low with concern. "They've been watching us, making their way through the territory. We need to prepare." The woman felt a knot form in her stomach. She had heard stories of conflicts between tribes, the bloodshed that could follow a misstep. The idea of violence, of losing the peace she had found, was more terrifying than she had ever imagined. "What do we need to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear churning inside her. The warrior's gaze softened, but his tone remained firm. Stay close. We will gather the others and set up the defenses. We'll wait for them to make their move. The woman nodded, a sense of determination settling over her. She had been given a new chance at life, a chance to build something stronger, something more than just survival. She would not let it be destroyed so easily. The tribe's response was swift. The warriors gathered, moving in a silent rhythm, preparing for whatever confrontation lay ahead. The women and children were led deeper into the safety of the camp, their protection now the highest priority. The woman stood alongside the warrior, watching as the rest of the tribe formed a perimeter, their eyes sharp, their movements calculated. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the camp. The woman's heart beat in her chest, each thud a reminder of how far she had come, how much she had to protect now. She glanced at her child, who was being cared for by another woman in the center of the camp, and felt a surge of resolve. This was her family now, and she would fight to keep them safe. As night fell, the tension in the air thickened. The sounds of the camp became muted, every member of the tribe waiting in the heavy silence, anticipating the arrival of the scouts. The woman felt her nerves on edge. She had never been part of a battle before, never witnessed the violence that could arise between tribes. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing. She couldn't run anymore. She wasn't the same woman who had fled her past. She had found strength in this tribe, and now she would stand with them, no matter what came. Hours passed, the tension rising with every minute. The stars above seemed too bright, too close, as if watching the unfolding events below. Then, just as the camp seemed to settle into an uneasy calm, the silence was shattered by the sound of horses' hooves. The woman's breath caught in her throat as shadows moved through the trees, the riders drawing near. The warriors of the Spokane were ready. They had prepared for this moment, and now they would face it head-on. The woman could see the silhouettes of the enemy riders, their horses moving swiftly, their bodies tense with purpose. The warrior at her side gave her a final, reassuring glance. "Stay here," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "If it comes to fighting, do not leave the camp." She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest as the warrior turned to join the others. Her gaze followed him, watching as he moved into position with the rest of the tribe's warriors. The scouts had arrived, and the tension that had been building for hours finally snapped. The woman's mind raced as she stood there, surrounded by the silent, watchful tribe. She couldn't help but wonder if she was ready for this, if she was ready to face the consequences of her new life. The warriors of the Spokane were skilled, but so were the scouts from the other tribe. The clash of cultures, of forces, was inevitable. And in that moment, as the first arrow flew through the air, she realized that this was her test, not just of survival, but of her strength, her resolve. She had chosen to be here, to stand with these people, and now she would prove her place. The battle was not just for land, it was for the future. Her child's future. And in that moment, with the sound of battle rising around her, she knew that she would fight for both. The sounds of hooves grew louder, the sharp clatter of horses galloping striking the air like the pounding of a war drum. The woman stood frozen, her heart hammering in her chest, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the shelter. The battle had begun, and there was no turning back. She could hear the fierce cries of the warriors, the clash of weapons, the chaotic noises of battle filling the air. In the distance, the campfire flickered brightly, casting long shadows across the ground as the fight intensified. She had never imagined she would find herself in the midst of such violence. The warrior had warned her to stay inside, to keep safe, but she couldn't. She had to know what was happening. She had to know that her child was safe, that the tribe was safe. Without thinking, she stepped away from the shelter, moving quickly and silently toward the edge of the camp. The night was cold, the wind biting at her skin, but it did little to quell the fear that surged through her. She was no longer a stranger here. She was part of this tribe, and this was her battle now. As she neared the edge of the camp, she could see the silhouettes of the Spokane warriors engaging with the scouts from the neighboring tribe. The battle was fierce, but there was a sense of controlled chaos. Each warrior knew their role, knew how to move with precision. She watched the warrior who had saved her, his movements fluid and calculated, as he led the charge against the enemy. The tension in the air was thick, the weight of life and death hanging over every swing of the sword, every strike of the bow. The woman felt a lump form in her throat as she realized how much she had come to care for these people. She couldn't stand by and do nothing. She had to contribute, even if it was only in some small way. Without a second thought, she grabbed a bow from one of the nearby warriors who had fallen back momentarily, then knocked an arrow. Her hands were shaking, but she forced herself to focus. She had learned the basics of archery in her time here, and now she would put that knowledge to the test. She took a deep breath, aimed at the advancing enemy, and let the arrow fly. It struck its mark, the sharp sound of the impact echoing in the night. The woman's heart raced, but she didn't have time to process the success. There was no time to celebrate. She quickly grabbed another arrow, knocked it, and fired again. She moved with purpose now, no longer just a spectator, but an active participant in the defense of her new home. Her arms ached from the strain, but she refused to stop. She couldn't afford to stop. As the battle raged on, she saw the warrior move toward the center of the conflict. He was leading the charge, protecting the women and children who were still in the heart of the camp. She felt a surge of gratitude for him, for all he had done for her and her child. But the realization hit her hard. This was not just his battle. It was hers too. This tribe had taken her in, had given her a place when she had nowhere else to go. She couldn't run now. She couldn't turn her back on them. The sound of a war cry broke her focus, and she turned just in time to see one of the scouts break through the line. The warrior, noticing the threat, quickly closed the gap, meeting the scout head-on. The clash was brutal, a whirlwind of movement and sound, but she could see the warrior's skill, the way he moved with deadly precision. In that moment, she realized that the bond between them was more than just a promise. It was a partnership forged in survival, in the shared understanding of what it meant to protect those you loved. She didn't wait for the battle to end. She couldn't. She kept firing, her arrows finding their marks one by one. The fight seemed endless, but she refused to let her guard down. She had no idea how much time passed, but eventually, the cries of battle began to fade. The fighting slowed, the noise tapering off into an eerie silence. The woman lowered her bow, breathing heavily, sweat and dirt caked on her face. She looked around the camp, the smoke from the fires lingering in the air, the warriors moving through the aftermath, tending to the wounded and securing the perimeter. Her heart was still racing, but now there was a sense of relief. The scouts had been pushed back, the tribe's defenses held strong. She looked to the warrior, who was standing at the edge of the camp, surveying the battlefield. He turned to her, his gaze meeting hers, and for a moment, there was only silence. But in that silence, she understood. She had done her part. The tribe had survived, and she had survived too. As the warriors began to regroup, tending to the wounded and preparing for the next steps, the woman walked over to the warrior. "Thank you," she said, her voice rough from the tension, but filled with gratitude. "For everything." The warrior gave a small nod, his eyes softening just for a moment. "You fought well," he said, his voice steady. "You belong here." She nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. This was her life now, and she would face whatever came next, not as a stranger, but as a member of this tribe, a protector of this new family. Together, they had weathered the storm, and together, they would face whatever the future held. The morning after the battle, the camp was quiet, an uneasy peace settling over the Spokane tribe. The aftermath was a mixture of exhaustion and relief, with warriors tending to the wounded and others keeping watch over the perimeter. The woman stood outside the shelter, her eyes scanning the horizon. She had fought beside the tribe, and now, in the calm of the dawn, she realized just how much had changed. This was her life now. She had faced danger, stood with the Spokane, and proven her place among them. But the weight of the battle still pressed against her chest, the adrenaline wearing off, leaving behind a sense of vulnerability that she hadn't expected. As she stood there, the warrior approached, his figure silhouetted against the rising sun. His movements were steady, his eyes focused, but there was a subtle tension in his stance. The woman met his gaze, her thoughts racing. She had been waiting for this moment, unsure of what it would bring. "We've won," she said, her voice steady but with an undertone of uncertainty. The warrior nodded, his expression unreadable. Yes, for now, but we must stay vigilant. He paused for a moment, his gaze flickering over her before returning to the horizon. You did well. Better than I expected. She could hear the quiet pride in his voice, but also something else, an unspoken recognition. She had fought with courage, and she had proven herself in a way that made her feel more connected to the tribe than ever before. But as much as she had proven herself, the warrior was right. The danger wasn't over. The scouts from the neighboring tribe would regroup, and this battle might not be the last. The woman knew that the tribe's survival depended on their ability to remain united, to stay strong in the face of future challenges. But she also realized that her role here had only just begun. The warrior's words lingered in the air as he stepped closer, his voice quieter now. This was only a test. The true challenge comes when the tribe faces a threat from within, when our unity is questioned. The woman frowned, not fully understanding what he meant. She had seen the strength of the Spokane, their ability to stand together against external forces. But now, with these new words, a sense of uncertainty settled in. What do you mean? She asked, her voice laced with curiosity and concern. The warrior looked at her, his eyes dark with something she couldn't quite read. There are forces among us, those who believe the tribe should be led differently, who think we should abandon the old ways for something new. It is a challenge that will come, whether we are ready or not. The weight of his words hit her like a wave, and for the first time since joining the tribe, she felt a deep sense of fear. Not just for her own safety, but for the future of the Spokane. She had seen the tribe's strength, their unity, but she had never considered the possibility of division from within. What can we do? She asked, feeling the tension in her chest grow. The warrior's face softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. We must remain strong, stay true to who we are. But it is not just the warriors who will decide our future. It is the people. You will play a part in that. Your strength, your belief in our ways, will be what guides the tribe through this challenge. The woman nodded, a sense of determination filling her. She had come to this place as a stranger, but now she was part of something larger, something worth protecting. She couldn't allow division to tear apart the family she had found here. I will stand with you, she said, her voice unwavering. The warrior studied her for a moment, his eyes searching hers, as if gauging her resolve. Then, without another word, he turned and began to walk toward the center of the camp. She followed him, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle into her chest. As they reached the heart of the camp, she could see that the mood had shifted. The warriors were still tending to the wounded, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. The woman's heart sank as she noticed the subtle exchanges of glances between the tribe members. Some faces seemed uncertain, others angry. The warrior turned to face her, his expression unreadable. It's beginning, he said softly. The division. You must be prepared. The woman took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had known that their survival depended on unity, but she hadn't realized how fragile that unity could be. She had to be ready, not just to defend the tribe from external threats, but to protect the very spirit that bound them together. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the woman's thoughts turned to her child, who was resting safely within the shelter. She had fought for her child's future, and now, she would fight for the future of the Spokane. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She wasn't going to let fear control her. She had found her place in this tribe, and she would stand with them, no matter the challenges they faced. The battle for the tribe's survival wasn't over. It was just beginning. The days following the battle were filled with a heavy, uneasy silence. The camp had been quiet for days, as the warriors of the Spokane gathered to discuss their next steps. Despite their victory, the tension in the air was palpable. The woman had seen it before, in the faces of the tribe members, in the hushed conversations that seemed to stop whenever she walked by. There was a rift beginning to form, one that threatened to divide the very foundation of the tribe. The warrior, ever watchful, had spent most of his time meeting with the elders and leaders, attempting to keep the peace. But even he couldn't ignore the tension. He would often cast a long, lingering look at her, as if seeking her strength to help hold everything together. The woman had spent the past few weeks thinking about what he had said, about the future of the tribe. She had felt fear before, fear of losing everything, fear of failure. But now, with the division starting to grow, she realized that this fear was something different. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the tribe, about their survival. And the battle wasn't just against the enemy. It was against something deeper, something more insidious, the possibility of losing their unity. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, the woman found herself standing outside the shelter, watching the flickering flames from the fire pit cast long shadows over the camp. She had been invited to join the elders that night, to witness a ceremony that had long been a part of Spokane tradition. It was a ceremony to honor their ancestors, to remind the tribe of their shared strength, of the blood that ran through their veins. The warrior had asked her to come, his face serious as he looked at her. "This is where you will understand the depth of our connection," he had said. "This is where you will see the bond that has held us together for generations." She had agreed, her heart filled with both anticipation and apprehension. As she approached the fire, she could see the circle of tribe members gathered, their faces solemn as they prepared for the ceremony. The warrior was there, standing with the elders, his presence commanding, yet calm. The woman felt a deep sense of respect for him, for everything he had done to protect her, to protect the tribe. She could see now that his strength wasn't just in his ability to fight. It was in his unwavering belief in the Spokane way, in the unity they had built over generations. The ceremony began with the elder standing at the center of the circle, his voice low as he began to speak. He spoke of the ancestors, of the struggles they had faced, and the strength they had drawn from the earth, the sky, and the waters that ran through the land. He spoke of the bonds that held the tribe together, of the sacrifices made by those who came before them. And as the elder spoke, the woman felt something stir deep inside her, a connection to something much larger than herself, a feeling of belonging she had never experienced before. The firelight flickered, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the tribe members, and in that moment, the woman realized the truth. This was more than just a group of people fighting to survive. This was a community, bound by shared history, shared struggles, and shared dreams. And she was part of it. As the ceremony continued, the woman was invited to join the circle, to speak of her journey, of her own struggles, and the strength she had found among the Spokane. Her heart pounded in her chest, but as she stepped forward, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice steady despite the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "I have traveled far," she began, "and I have seen the darkness that comes with fear. But here, I have found light. I have found a family, a place where I can stand strong, where I can protect those I love." She looked around at the faces of the tribe, the people who had accepted her, who had given her the strength to fight alongside them. "I stand with you. Now," she said, her voice unwavering. "I will fight for this tribe, for our future, for the future of my child." As she finished speaking, there was a quiet murmur of approval from the tribe members, their faces softening as they saw the sincerity in her words. The warrior stood beside her, his eyes filled with pride. The elder nodded, his face full of approval. "You are one of us now," he said, his voice rich with tradition. "The strength of our people runs through you." The woman felt a surge of emotion, a sense of pride and belonging that filled her chest. She had found her place among the Spokane, not just as a survivor, but as a member of their family. And as the ceremony came to a close, with the fire burning brightly and the stars shining above, she knew that the battle for the tribe's future was far from over. But she also knew that they would face whatever came together as one. The challenges ahead were unknown, but she was no longer afraid. She was ready to stand beside the Spokane, to fight for their future, and to protect the family she had found here. Together, they would face whatever came next. The days following the ceremony were marked by a quiet intensity. The tribe had begun to settle into a new rhythm, one that took into account the new challenges they had faced and the growing rift that threatened to tear them apart. The woman, now fully integrated into the Spokane tribe, felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Her role was not only as a mother and a protector, but as a member of the tribe, someone who would help guide them through the difficult times ahead. She had come to realize that her past, the pain and suffering she had endured, had prepared her for this moment. It had given her the strength to stand with the Spokane, to fight for their future, and to protect the ones she loved. The warrior, who had saved her and her child, had become more than just a protector. He had become a mentor, teaching her the ways of the tribe and how to navigate the complex dynamics within it. Despite his stoic exterior, she could sense that he was burdened by the same uncertainty that weighed on her. The tribe's future was uncertain, and there were voices within the community that challenged their traditions. These voices threatened to disrupt the unity they had worked so hard to build. The woman had heard whispers among the warriors, discussions about the tribe's future, and the growing discontent that some felt about the old ways. Some believed that the Spokane needed to adapt, to change with the times. Others, like the warrior and the elders, argued that their strength lay in their traditions, in their connection to the land and their ancestors. It was clear to the woman that the coming days would require more than just physical strength. They would require wisdom and unity. The woman spent her time helping to fortify the camp, strengthening its defenses and learning more about the Spokane's ways. She had learned the art of survival, but now she had to learn the art of diplomacy, of understanding the delicate balance between the old ways and the new. She had seen how the warriors spoke with the elders, how they weighed every decision carefully, considering not just the present, but the future. She knew that the tribe's survival would depend on their ability to reconcile their differences. As the days passed, the woman grew more confident in her role within the tribe. She had earned the respect of the warriors, who saw her as a fierce protector, and the elders, who valued her wisdom and insight. She had proven herself in battle, but it was the quiet strength she exhibited in times of peace that earned her place among them. The warrior, once distant and reserved, had begun to rely on her more, trusting her judgment as much as his own. One evening, as the sun began to set and the camp gathered around the fire, the woman found herself standing alongside the warrior, listening as the elders spoke of the challenges ahead. The tribe was at a crossroads, and the decisions made in the coming days would shape their future. The warrior looked at her, his expression serious. "This is a time for careful thought," he said quietly. "We must decide which path to take, and it will not be easy." The woman nodded, her gaze drifting to the fire as the flames flickered in the twilight. She understood the gravity of the situation. The tribe's future depended on the choices they made now, and the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty. But she also knew that they had come this far because of their unity, their strength as a people, and their unwavering commitment to one another. "We will find a way," she said softly, more to herself than to the warrior. "Together, we can make it through this." The warrior looked at her, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Together," he agreed. As the night wore on, the woman found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She had come to the Spokane as a stranger, an outsider, but now, she felt that she had found her place among them. She had found her purpose, not just in protecting her child, but in protecting the tribe, in standing with them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The firelight flickered against the darkening sky, and the woman felt a deep sense of resolve settle within her. She had learned from the past, had fought for her future, and now, she would stand beside the Spokane in the fight for their survival. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: she was no longer afraid. She had found a family, and together, they would face whatever came next. The days that followed the decision were filled with a strange, calm determination. The tribe had come together in a way that felt different than before. There was no longer any doubt about their future. They were bound by the shared knowledge that the struggles ahead would test them, but they had the strength to survive. The woman, once an outsider, now felt the weight of the Spokane tribe's history and their future resting on her shoulders. She had seen how the elders met, how their faces remained grim, but their decisions were made with confidence. There were still moments when she felt like an outsider, still unsure of whether she could truly belong to something so ancient, so much larger than herself. But in her heart, she knew the tribe had accepted her. She had earned her place. The warrior, ever steady, had become more than a mentor. He was a partner, an ally, someone who understood the complexity of what they faced. The bond between them had deepened. She could see it in the way he looked at her now, not just as a survivor, but as a leader in her own right. They had both fought for survival, but now, together, they were working toward a future. On one crisp morning, the tribe gathered near the riverbank for the first time since the last battle. There was a ceremony, not to honor the ancestors, but to honor the survivors and the new life they were building. The warrior stood beside her, his posture strong and proud as the tribe assembled. The woman felt a sense of clarity wash over her. The warrior's words echoed in her mind. Together, we can make it through this. It was a truth she had come to accept, not just as a member of the Spokane, but as a part of a greater whole. She stood at the fire's edge, feeling the heat of the flames as they danced in the cold morning air. The tribe's faces were focused, their expressions full of quiet determination. She had a feeling that today, this very moment, would be a turning point for the tribe. The elder stepped forward, his movements slow but deliberate, and the camp fell silent. His voice, though aged, carried the authority of generations of leaders. "We have fought for our survival," he began, "and we stand here now, stronger than we have ever been. But the strength we have is not only in our warriors. It is in the bonds we have forged. It is in the unity we stand for." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the gathered faces of the tribe. "We welcome our sister, who has fought with us, who has proven her strength, her resolve. Her heart now beats with ours." The woman's chest tightened as the elder turned his gaze toward her. She felt the weight of the moment, the immense honor of standing here, surrounded by people who had come to trust her, who had accepted her as one of their own. She stepped forward as the elder gestured toward her. Her voice trembled at first, but then she found her strength. "I stand with you now," she said, her voice firm, "not just as someone who has been saved, but as someone who is ready to fight for this tribe, for this future. I have seen what we can accomplish when we stand together." The tribe nodded in agreement, a murmur of approval rising from the crowd. She looked at the warrior, standing beside her, his expression softer than usual, a look of pride in his eyes. They had come so far together. The tribe was more than a community, it was a family, bound not just by blood, but by a shared purpose. The woman realized then that this was her true home. This was the place where she could build a future for her child, where she could live with honor and strength. The elder continued, his words ringing clear. "Our path is not easy, but it is ours to walk. We face challenges, yes, but we will face them with the same strength that has carried us through every trial." The tribe raised their hands, a silent vow passing between them. The fire crackled as the woman stood at the edge of the circle, feeling the heat of the flames and the warmth of the tribe's resolve. She had been afraid, uncertain of what the future held. But now, as she stood here, surrounded by her new family, she knew that she had a purpose. The future would be uncertain, but it was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace. As the ceremony ended, the woman took her place among the warriors, not just as a survivor, but as a protector, a member of the Spokane who had earned her place. Together, they would face whatever came next, whatever trials, whatever challenges, and they would do so as a family. The sun began to set, the fire burning brightly in front of them. And as the shadows lengthened, the woman realized that the future, though uncertain, was now in her hands and in the hands of the tribe. Together, they would walk the path ahead, side by side. In this gripping tale of survival and unity, we dive deep into a world of Western stories that explore the raw emotions of individuals trying to forge a new life against the backdrop of a fierce and unforgiving land. The protagonist, once a stranger, finds herself accepted into a tribe where the strength of community and the resilience of the human spirit are tested. As she embarks on a journey of self-discovery and survival, the narrative weaves through complex relationships, personal growth, and the unspoken bond that ties the tribe together. Alongside the warrior who saved her, she must navigate the delicate balance between tradition and change, battling not only external threats, but the potential fracture within the tribe itself. Through intense moments of conflict and peace, this story captures the essence of what it means to belong and fight for a future. As with all great Western stories, the ultimate message is one of resilience, unity, and the power of standing together when faced with adversity. The characters' personal struggles reflect the timeless themes found in many Western stories, where the fight for survival is not just about protecting one's life, but also about safeguarding the bonds that define us. In the end, the woman learns the true meaning of family, not through blood, but through shared struggles and triumphs. These Western stories remind us that no matter the trials, together we are stronger, and it is through these hardships that true strength is forged.